Today I wanted to do a video responding to this CNBC video titled 6 Ways to Convince Someone the Gender Pay Gap is Real. Now, I'm not making this video to bash anyone or personally attack anyone. I just want to provide some education on this topic. Before we get into the video, I just want to state clearly what people mean when they say the gender pay gap is a myth. First, the gender pay gap is a statistic provided by the United States Census Bureau that compares the median incomes of all male and female full-time workers. Female full-time workers consistently make less money than male full-time workers. In this video, they say female full-time workers only make 80 cents for every dollar a male full-time worker earns, but as of 2019, female full-time workers make 82 cents for every dollar a full-time male worker earns. Now, that part of the gender wage gap is a fact. The problem is that many people who don't have an understanding of basic research methods or statistics assume that this means women make 82 cents for every dollar a man earns for doing the same job. The implication here is that workers are systematically discriminating against women in the workplace and paying them less. This is false. This is where the myth lies. That statistic merely compares the median incomes of all male and female full-time workers without controlling for confounding variables, such as occupation, education, hours worked, continuous years worked, geographic location, etc. Studies suggest that when you control for these factors, in other words, when you compare women to men who have the same career, same education, work the same number of hours, have worked the same number of continuous years, etc., the wage gap largely disappears, completely disappears, or slightly favors women, depending on the data set you are using. So on that note, let's see if CNBC can convince me that women in fact make only 80 cents for every dollar a man earns for doing the same job. The first statistic this reporter provides is that only 61% of men believe that men make more than women for doing the same jobs. So this is a confusing statistic because if 61% of men believe that women only make 77 to 82 cents for every dollar a man earns for doing the same job, then that number is way too high. It should be zero. Now, if you focus on a single study that says, for example, there is 4 to 8% unexplained variance between male and female wages after you can control for all these confounding variables, then maybe you could say that. Maybe you could say that, yeah, women make 4 to 8% less than men when you control for confounding variables. But again, that depends on what study you're citing and what data set you're using. So she provides that statistic which says for the same job, and then she equates that with saying women earn 80 cents for every dollar a man earns in 2016. Again, this statistic does not control for any confounding variables, so she falsely equates all full-time workers with workers doing the same job. She then says that black women only earn 63 cents for every dollar a man earns, and Hispanic Latino women only earn 54 cents. Again, these statistics are for all full-time workers, and it is not comparing males and females who work the same professions, have the same education, etc. If you took black female neurosurgeons and compared them to all male neurosurgeons, and they work the same number of hours, the same continuous years, etc., then the wage gap would be minimal, non-existent, or favor the black women depending on the data set. For example, Thomas Sowell in his book Economic Facts and Fallacies quotes the New England Medical Journal, which states, in 1990, young male physicians earned 41% more per year than young female physicians. However, after adjusting for differences in specialty, practice setting, and other characteristics, no earnings difference was evident. Thomas Sowell then goes on to point out that male physicians in this data set worked 500 hours a year more than the female physicians. So let's get into the myths they provide and see if they do a good job of debunking them. The first myth that they try to debunk is that women leave the workforce to have children and that this explains the gender wage gap. Now, while this isn't the only factor that affects incomes, it certainly does have a big effect. The reporter then says it's not that women want to leave the workforce, it is that they are forced to. The implication here is that the government should step in and force companies to provide paid child leave. CNBC and I have two very different definitions of the word force. According to CNBC, it is force if a woman voluntarily gets pregnant, and then voluntarily comes to an arrangement with her partner, where she stays home to raise the child while the man is earning income. I am a libertarian, so I believe that it is force to use intimidation, threats, and coercion from the government to force companies to pay wages to someone who is not producing. If companies want to voluntarily offer paid child leave, then that is fine. But it is only an act of force when the government literally forces companies to do something they otherwise would not do in a free market. She then says women experience a pay cut after childbirth, which is only logical because they are no longer producing for the company, and that men experience a pay increase called the fatherhood bonus. This pay increase for fathers isn't because employers magically decide to give every new father a raise, but likely because the father is working more hours or actively seeking promotions in order to provide for his larger family. It's weird how CNBC doesn't acknowledge that if a husband brings home a larger paycheck, it also benefits his wife. Again, Thomas Sowell states in his book Economic Facts and Fallacies, the wives of affluent and wealthy men tend to work less and therefore earn less, but the wife of a rich man is not poor no matter how low her income might be. He also points out that surveys suggest women make a disproportionate share of spending decisions. He states that a 2006 article from The Economist suggests women make perhaps 80% of consumers' buying decisions, from healthcare and homes to furniture and food. The reporter then goes on to say that even when women don't have kids and stay in the workforce, we still see a pay gap. And I would say yes, because you didn't control for confounding variables like education, profession, hours worked, total years worked, geographical location, etc. When you control for these factors, some data sets show that women who never have children make more money than men, depending on the dataset. When you control for these factors, some datasets show that women who never have children make more money than men. The second myth they try to debunk is that men simply work harder and work longer hours. Again, those who say that the wage gap is a myth aren't arguing that the number of hours worked by itself explains all of the variance in the pay gap. It is simply stating that the gross statistics they provide do not account for differences in hours worked. And when you compare women who work the same jobs for the same number of hours and control for all of these other variables, the wage gap either almost disappears, completely disappears, or slightly favors women. What's weird is that the video argues that this is a myth, but then says that women spend more time out of the workforce and do more work at home. So they are admitting that women who raise children put less hours in the workforce. Again, they fail to acknowledge that women who choose to stay home and take care of their kids benefit from their husband's larger paychecks, assuming he gets the fatherhood bonus. Again, in the book Economic Facts and Fallacies, Thomas Sowell states, a government study in early 21st century America showed that the average American family spent 70% more on clothing for women and girls than on clothing for men and boys. I also think it's funny how the video shows a woman struggling to cook and take care of the kids while the lazy husband is just chilling in his nice office. The third myth is that men are more educated than women. Now, this is a straw man argument. I am not saying that women are less educated than men. I am simply saying that when you compare apples to apples, that the pay gap largely, if not entirely, disappears. She debunks this myth by saying that women earn 56% of all bachelor's degrees in the United States. And they say that if you compare women who have the same level of education, the pay gap is even higher. In other words, if you compare all female PhDs to all male PhDs, men earn more. This is easily explained by the fact that men earn PhDs in more difficult and competitive fields than women on average. Also, they again do not control for any other confounding variables that I have previously discussed, so this statistic proves absolutely nothing. A PhD in education will most likely earn significantly less than a PhD in engineering. Myth number 4 is that women don't know how to negotiate. Now, I'm not going to touch this one because I'm not really familiar with any of the experimental studies that have been conducted on the negotiating tactics of men and women. But she argues that studies show women who ask for pay raises are viewed unfavorably. But again, just how much of the variance in male and female wages are explained by that when you control for the more important variables? So myth number 5 is that men pursue higher paying careers. This is true because when you control for career chosen, the pay gap is significantly, if not entirely, reduced. She says that women are not deliberately setting out to find lower paying jobs. I would disagree because you can very easily look up the estimated salaries based on degree level and academic discipline. If you have spent a day in college, you have most likely done this. You've looked up the career that you want to choose, and you look at the estimated median salary nationwide, and then that can affect your decision on what discipline you want to study. So if you know beforehand what the median earnings are for someone in your field, then you can easily argue that yes, women are deliberately choosing lower paying fields. Thomas Sowell suggests that women may choose fields that allow them to take time off to raise kids and then re-enter the workforce without much penalty. He states, women have tended to make career choices influenced by the likelihood that they would at some point or other become mothers. Since motherhood has usually entailed a period of withdrawal from full-time work outside the home, the cost of such withdrawal becomes a factor in occupational choices. For example, an elementary school teacher can much more easily take time off and rebound in the school system than a person who is in a more competitive field like computer science, where best practices and methods are constantly changing. The CNBC reporter then argues that when women begin to dominate certain fields, the wages for that career drop, even for men in that field. The implication is that society sees a woman doing something and then says, that's not that important, let's pay them less. I have a much simpler explanation for why wages decrease when women begin to dominate a certain field. Supply and demand. The more workers there are in a certain field, the lower the wages go because businesses no longer have to compete for workers by raising wages. Professions that pay a lot of money are those that are in high demand and that have a low supply of qualified workers. Neurosurgeons make more than marriage family therapists because a person on their deathbed is willing to pay a lot more for the services of a neurosurgeon, of which there are very few, than a person who needs marriage counseling but has 10,000 therapists to choose from in their city. Myth number 6 is that it's just 20 cents. Now, I don't know a serious person who would say that a 20% pay cut is not a significant cut. So I am imagining they got this myth from, someone in the YouTube comments who just doesn't understand basic statistics. But in short, no serious person debating the wage gap myth has ever said that 20% of someone's income is not a big deal. If you would like to learn more about the issues behind the gender pay gap, I definitely recommend reading Thomas Sowell's book, Economic Facts and Fallacies.